Hey everyone, welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. As always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on future deep dives. So we're picking up right where we left off in our deep dive on the conflict in the DRC. And, well, the news coming out of there has been pretty rough lately.
Yeah, unfortunately, the situation for the SANDF soldiers has become even more precarious.
Yeah, we're getting reports now of 4 more SANDF soldiers being killed in clashes with those M23 rebels. That brings the total to at least 13 soldiers lost in the eastern DRC. And this news is really upping the pressure on South Africa's government and their military leaders. You know, they're facing a lot of questions about their strategy. How are they going to effectively support their troops, and how are they going to work towards a resolution to this whole thing?
Right, the demand for transparency and accountability is definitely growing louder. Reports from the weekend's fighting paint a pretty grim picture. Both sides, the SANDF and the M23, suffered casualties during those intense battles on Friday and Saturday. There was even a point where they had to negotiate a temporary ceasefire just so both sides could retrieve their wounded and fallen soldiers.
God, it's a stark reminder of the human cost of this conflict. You know, we can talk about political maneuvers and strategies, but at the end of the day, it's real people's lives that are on the line.
Absolutely. It's so important to remember that. Behind all the strategic decisions and political complexities are individuals whose lives are being directly impacted by all of this.
Absolutely. So the latest reports suggest that SANDF troops have pulled back to their military base. Is this like a strategic retreat? And if so, what does it mean for the bigger picture?
Well, it's not explicitly stated, but yeah, withdrawing to the base could very well be a calculated move to try and de-escalate the situation. By reducing their forward presence, the SANDF might be trying to avoid being seen as the aggressor, and hopefully prevent further violence.
Yeah, that makes sense, because even if they don't intend to provoke anyone, just their presence in that environment could easily be misinterpreted. And we have to remember the context here. The eastern DRC is incredibly challenging terrain. It's dense, it's mountainous. And the M23 rebels, they have a home field advantage. They know that region like the back of their hand. It gives them a real tactical edge.
Oh, absolutely. Their familiarity with the terrain is a huge factor.
So if pulling back is a de-escalation tactic, what does that mean for getting the rest of the troops out? And even more importantly, bringing those fallen soldiers home?
Yeah, the SANDF is facing a real logistical nightmare, especially with limited air support capabilities. Extracting personnel and retrieving bodies in such a volatile and unpredictable environment, it requires very meticulous planning and a whole lot of coordination. I wouldn't be surprised if they have to negotiate more ceasefires just to carry out these sensitive operations.
And meanwhile, back in South Africa, there are families who are just desperately waiting for any news. The uncertainty and the fear that they must be going through right now is unimaginable.
It really is, and the SANDF has a real moral obligation to communicate clearly and quickly with these families. They deserve timely and accurate information about the situation on the ground. And most of all, they need to know the status of their loved ones. It really makes you wonder about the international community. Where do they stand in all of this? Their silence has been deafening.
It does feel like this conflict is just playing out in a vacuum. What do you think explains the lack of global attention and response?
Well, there are a few factors at play here. The DRC has a long and troubled history, decades of conflict and instability, and I think there's a sense of fatigue in the international community, almost a resignation. Like, this is just the norm in the DRC.
So you're saying the world has become desensitized to the suffering there?
It's a hard truth to admit, but it really seems that way. And on top of that, we're living in a time with so many other global crises. Climate change, economic instability. It's easy for a conflict like this to get lost in the noise.
That's a sobering thought. But it's hard to ignore the scale of the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in the DRC.
You're absolutely right. The human cost of this conflict is just staggering. We're talking millions of people displaced, countless lives lost. And it's not just the direct violence. This conflict is fueling poverty, hunger, disease. The situation is incredibly dire.
So if military intervention isn't the answer, and the international community seems reluctant to step in, what options are even left? Where do we go from here?
Well, it's important to remember that there are people and organizations on the ground in the DRC who are doing incredible work. They're providing humanitarian aid, advocating for peace, supporting those affected by the conflict. Their efforts are absolutely vital.
Yeah, they're the unsung heroes, putting themselves at risk every day in some of the most challenging and dangerous conditions imaginable.
Absolutely, their work is heroic. But ultimately, lasting peace in the DRC requires a multifaceted approach, both from within the DRC itself and from the international community. There needs to be a real commitment to addressing the root causes of this conflict, promoting dialogue and reconciliation, and supporting sustainable development.
So it's about creating an environment where peace can actually take root, not just trying to impose it from the outside.
Exactly. It's a long-term process. It requires patience, commitment, a willingness to listen and understand everyone's perspectives, but I truly believe it's possible. The people of the DRC deserve a chance to live in peace and security.
You mentioned earlier that all sides in this conflict need to do some serious soul-searching to look at their own contributions to the problem. That's a powerful idea. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, conflict often arises from a really complex web of grievances, perceived injustices, historical baggage. It's rarely a simple case of good versus evil. Each side has its own narrative, its own justification for its actions. And while it's important to acknowledge and understand those perspectives, I think it's equally important to encourage self-reflection.
Because if everyone's busy pointing fingers, no one's taking responsibility.
Precisely. And without that accountability, it becomes almost impossible to break free from that cycle of violence and retribution. When I talk about introspection, I'm talking about all stakeholders. The DRC government, the M23, rebels, regional powers, the international community. Everyone needs to honestly assess their actions and consider how they might have contributed to the situation we're in now.
That level of self-critique can be pretty tough to swallow.
Oh, absolutely no doubt about it. It takes humility, honesty, a willingness to confront some uncomfortable truths. But it's a crucial step if we're serious about achieving lasting peace. It's about acknowledging past mistakes, understanding the consequences of our actions, and being open to changing course.
So it's really about breaking down those narratives that everyone's clinging to and finding a way to build a shared understanding of the problem.
Yeah, that's the key. That shared understanding, that's the foundation for building trust, for starting a real dialogue, and ultimately for finding solutions.
There's a sense of hope in that isn't there. Even in the middle of all this conflict, there's still a chance for things to change for the better.
I truly believe that. It's a long road, and it'll be tough with plenty of setbacks along the way. But if the people in power, if they're willing to take a hard look at themselves and really acknowledge their own role in this conflict, then I think a more peaceful future for the DRC is definitely within reach.
That's a powerful thought and something I think we can all hold on to. We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the escalating conflict in the DRC, the incredibly tough situation facing those Sandy troops, and the urgent need for a solution that goes beyond just military action. A solution that actually addresses the root causes of this violence. We talked about the limitations of a purely military approach, the importance of dialogue and self-reflection, and the possibility of building that shared understanding as a way to achieve peace. So given everything we've discussed, what do you think is the most realistic path towards lasting peace in the DRC? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and be sure to share this deep dive with others so we can keep this important conversation going. Thanks for joining us on The Unseen Wisdom.